Hello, welcome to the PhD Life Raft podcast. I'm Emma Brzezinski, and in this episode, I am talking to the marvellous David Mendes, otherwise known as Papa PhD. We're talking about why the world needs PhDs, and David is here to remind you why you are so amazing and to inspire you as to what might come next for you. So I do hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, David.
Hi, Emma. How are you?
I am well. Thank you so much for being here. Feeling slightly intimidated because you are also known as Papa PhD and you have a gorgeous and very successful podcast on the PhD experience. So I feel like it should be you the other way around. And in fact, I am coming on to yours in a while, aren't I? So I'm quite excited about that. We'll have all the details in the show notes if people haven't found your podcast yet, because if they haven't, they should go and check it out. So thank you for being here and sharing some Papa PhD-ness with us.
Thank you for having me, Emma. It's a pleasure. I've been aware of the PhD Life Raft for a little while, and it's really the admiration, I think, goes both ways.
Oh, bless you! No, it's so lovely, isn't it? It's quite a small world, and it is. it's a lovely one. So in a minute, we're going to talk about why the world needs PhDs. But before we get into that, I'm going to extend the invitation, as I always do, for you to tell us a little bit about yourself and your own story and your journey through the PhD and out the other side.
Mm-hmm. So my story, I've always been interested in, since high school, in science. My second love was languages. I would have actually, in a parallel universe, I could have done what in Portugal, what we call Germanics, like English and German. But my parents kind of said, go for science, you'll do languages later on. Funny thing, now I'm a translator in the biomedical domain. But anyway, that's a little bit on the side.
You did exactly what they said. You did the languages later on. There you go.
There you go. So interest in nature and life sciences since I was young. I do my bachelor's plus master's at the University of Lisbon in the end of the 90s, and now I'm showing my age in microbiology and genetics. That was the major that I chose, and I didn't go straight away to graduate school. So the degree I got from Lisbon eventually, because there was a certain length, got an equivalency. Is that how you say it, to a master's?
Yeah.
But I was just working in the lab where I had done my final project for a couple of years. But eventually, after different experiences and 1 year teaching lab at a university in Lisbon, I decided, okay, I'd like to teach, but at another level. I'd like to be teaching class. I'd like to be a professor. And what was the path to that was, getting a PhD.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when I started looking. Well, I first looked at my interests. I wanted to move towards neuroscience, and I ended up finding a PhD program in Portugal at the University of Coimbra, the BEB program, that eventually allowed me to, after a year of seminars, come to Montreal, where I am now, where I stayed in the end, but to do my all the lab aspect of my PhD at the Montreal Neurological Institute. Fast forward 5 to 6 years, end of the PhD, difficulties even getting a publication because my animal model was imperfect, let's say, and it was a difficult last 2 years, let's say, of the PhD. And by the end, internally, it was clear to me that I was not going to follow up and try for a postdoc, etc. I decided, for different reasons, also I had a partner. I wanted to stick around in Montreal. Between not having an academically, at least for me, for my interpretation, an academically very successful PhD, although I did get my degree, of course, plus having different life plans, I said, okay, I need to reorient. And that's where it got a little bit difficult, because I had no network professionally outside academia. I didn't know the language. I didn't know the culture. I didn't know the landscape of what was out there. So, this is kind of actually the like the genesis of the idea of the podcast that ended up being born 9 years later, because this was 2010 when I defended, and the podcast Papa PhD, I launched it summer of 2019. I don't know if this is too rapid a recount of what happened, but I think it kind of shows my motivations and my why.
Yes, because the podcast is all about, taking your PhD into the world, if you like, in terms of what skills you can bring as a researcher, how you can have a life outside of academia, should that be the route that you take.
Exactly.
So yes, so which brings us to neatly, thank you. I'm going to say, David, you can just take over this whole episode,
yes,
please. But this brings us neatly to this discussion of why the world needs PhDs.
Precisely. So basically what happened like in 2010, 2011 was I had this kind of existential questioning of, did I just waste all these years of study because now I'm kind of, veering away from that path that I was kind of launching onto, and not staying at the bench, and actually, physically being far from university walls and doing something else in other spaces. And what I ended up doing, of course, when you don't have a well structured and curated network of people in a professional network, you start asking friends, asking colleagues, family, is there something, do you know someone who needs someone with my profile? So the first job that I got was like that. Because I had this experience teaching, I did some distance tutoring in sciences, which was great, but not it was not a full-time job. It was not, it didn't fulfill what I needed and wanted for my personal and family project. And so what ended up happening was that I ended up trying to understand where people who had been at the Montreal Neurological Institute with me and who also had not followed up their research career, where they were. And I knew they were around. They were somewhere in Montreal. And that's how I ended up hearing about two people going to this agency where they did medical writing, which I had never heard about. And there started a kind of a series of conversations with these people to understand what that was, and that led to one of them saying, "Hey, give me your CV. I'll pass it on to HR. If you're really interested, you'll come. You'll interview. You'll test, etc. And we'll see." And then from that, I started like an almost 5-year stint at this agency doing medical writing. So, and this is kind of at the center. So I mentioned conversations, and conversations are kind of at the center of my concept of what I like to share with young researchers, be they during their PhD or after their PhD, is to have conversations. But we can talk about that later in the in the final part of the interview when you ask for the top tips. I have some top tips on conversations there. But does this track with some experience that you've heard about?
Yes, I say, because I think that there's this sense of people often in that kind of messy middle of their PhD going, what am I doing here? What is this all about? And what skills am I developing? Where am I? As well as at the end, in terms of, oh, now I need to get a job. What can I do? Especially if I don't want to go into academia, or the job market in academia, as we know at the moment, is just horrendous. And so kind of needing to look for something else. So absolutely. And I think that, sadly, I've heard people going, well, I wish I'd never done it because, and so what I know that you're really good at is just recognizing and helping other people to recognize those skills, those experiences, and the opportunities as well, the opportunities that are out there as a PhD researcher. So over to you, David. Tell us why the world needs PhDs, and tell us where it can take you,
So this realization of the world needing PhDs, and it's of course it's kind of a big flashy title, but it has become more and more real for me with the podcast, with all these people that I've been interviewing since 2019, because there's two aspects to this. First, after my PhD, whenever I was invited to any career panels, I would say yes, because I've always wanted to give back and help people not go through the anguish that I went through at the end of my PhD.
Right.
And it showed me two things. First, I was not the only one having those feelings. Every year, every time I was going to, and then this is a lot, during almost 9 years of going to different career panels, I understood that, well, graduate students go through this. Most of them actually, or a large part of them goes through this questioning and through this anguish.
Yes.
And so this is actually why I started the podcast. I said, well, I know many people who are now entrepreneurs, who are now working, let's say, entrepreneurs for themselves, or working in companies and working in industry. Let's share their stories to inspire people. And I ended up discovering the vastness of what PhDs are doing out there. And I'm just thinking lately, there's an episode of Papa PhD that's not yet published, but it's someone who has a PhD in philosophy, and the whole episode is about what's out there for PhDs in philosophy. And he's working at Google, and he's in a very well paid and in a very fulfilling career in a very well known tech company, right?
I love it.
So this affirmation that the world needs PhDs comes from me having all these conversations and understanding that PhDs, people who are not only curious, but also resourceful, but also have this experience in solving problems or being in frontier domains of finding new solutions that don't exist yet. Well, they are needed in different spaces in our society, be it government, dealing with climate change, dealing with social change and migrations, so social sciences and life sciences and hard sciences. Also all the tech and industry frontiers. We just went through COVID-19, and research was really front and center. When we were all turning on our radio or our TV and hearing about how these vaccines were being developed. Well, guess who is working in those labs and finding these solutions for new and huge problems?
Yes.
People who have a research background.
Well, I love what you're saying there about frontiers, people working at the frontiers, and how amazing people who are doing PhDs are, because I think people forget that, don't they? Because it's them. So they're like, oh, well, it's just what I do. But actually, it's an amazing thing to set out on that research journey and to do all those things that you just said in terms of putting yourself out there, to ask new questions, to be at the cutting edge. And this is amazing. People will really appreciate that. I love that you're reminding us of that. And I wonder if you had any more examples. I love the philosopher at Google.
Yes.
Any other examples you could share?
Actually, one recent guest whose episode actually has been published. She had her PhD in psychology, and she's also working for Google. But then someone who I've just interviewed, who also actually coaches academics around academic burnout, and her job that she's doing is called data steward, and it's a new job that has appeared with GDPR and the need to really take care about how entities and companies treat their data. And guess who has been, spending years amassing and treating big amounts of data and making sense out of them? Well, PhDs and researchers. Similar to that, there's a it's not as new because now I think it's very well known. I've had people on the show who have PhDs in chemistry and another domain which I don't remember. I think neuroscience, because especially when you work in one of these domains, there's a lot of statistics and there's a lot of data crunching. Well, companies in different domains. One of them actually was a company in fashion, and he was a data scientist working on the behind the scenes, algorithms, etc., behind what's happening on the sales website of that company. And he has a PhD and even postdoc in chemistry. So it's really, I was saying frontiers. I think that's what really defines it, right? Now, I don't know if you have a reaction to that, but I have some other examples if you want.
No, I truly and utterly love that a PhD in chemistry is going to take you into fashion. That is genius.
I was amazed too.
It's brilliant. Put it in the prospectus. Come on. I love that. But what I think is so brilliant about this is just reminding people of the skills that they have, because I think sadly a PhD can often feel de-skilling. And I think it's so important to remember how skillful you are and the what you have to offer to others, be it in fashion, be it in Google, wherever you choose to go.
It's, to me, it's like you're learning. So during your PhD, let's say you're an archer, right? You have your quiver and you have arrows, and you're learning during your PhD to hit a target that's like, I don't know, 10,000 yards away, so you don't even see it without binoculars, and you have to hit it. So your tunnel vision is extreme. But what you have to realize at the end is that quiver, those arrows, you can use them in other, you can widen your horizons, you can widen your vistas and use them in other domains. And just because you've had this very focused, very narrow stint and experience of years, 3, 4, 5 years, depending on where you are, trying to hit this very small target that's very far away, you need to give yourself permission at the end to breathe in, breathe out, and say, okay, now let's unfocus and see what else I can do with these arrows.
I love it. I love it. And I also love this sense of, and these other things are not second best, right? These other things can be incredible opportunities. Like the PhD is a kind of passport into amazing roles and ways of contributing to society.
To society. And actually, because you mentioned society, I've just interviewed not so long ago another person who also has a PhD, but also has has a different, longer track, because he's in another stage, let's say, but he's the scientific in chief of Quebec, and he's in politics. But what's important for his role is his background in sciences and in his interest in science. I've also interviewed people who are in Washington in policy, and they are working. They are kind of the bridge between universities in Washington, so they're actually directly impacting what's happening in policy for universities. So there really, really are many spaces where the fact that you've gone through a PhD is a plus. In some of them, the degree itself might not be of importance to get hired, but what you bring, that quiver that I mentioned, ends up being important and ends up allowing you to evolve at a different pace or in a different way within the organization. And here I mentioned government. So organizations it's not just the private, it's not just industry. It could be government, it could be community, community organizations around you. And one of the things that I've heard a lot from these people is that for them, one of the pluses of being outside of the ivory tower is that they can see the effects of what they do faster. So yeah, I think I've mentioned governmental, I've mentioned industry, also different levels of involvement in the community, because there's thinking about people who in social sciences and how they might be implicated in, and some guests that I've had are in dealing with immigration in countries in Europe that are now receiving increasing waves of migrants from countries that are at war or etc. These are very important, very dire problems that need new solutions and that need people who can think about them in a different scope. And this is another place where you can have a real word to say and real help to bring with your research background, in my opinion.
Brilliant. It's brilliant. And really, as you say, there are so many stories, and your podcast, I would totally recommend it. As I've already said, if you haven't listened before, then do check out the show notes and get listening and get inspired. Because yes, let's have gorgeous PhD people taking over the world. So now I'm aware of time.
Uh-oh.
It always goes so quickly. It really
does,
does.
doesn't
it? Yeah. But so now I'm going to ask you this very reductive question of offering some top tips. So if people are there thinking, what is this all about? What would your top tips be?
So my top tips. The first one will be, if you're not on LinkedIn, get on LinkedIn. That's the first top tip, because that's where, for me, a lot of interesting things can start. Why? Because people who are on LinkedIn are kind of saying, hey, I'm open to conversation, I'm open to connect. And whereas you probably won't be comfortable calling up a company and say, hey, I'd like to talk with your CEO, whatever. If the person's on LinkedIn, there's always, they're always open for you to reach out. So that would be top tip one. But why? Because there's a search functionality in LinkedIn which allows you to look for people that are alumni from where you come from in terms of your university. Also, you can look for terms like your PhD, and you can look for profiles of people who have a research journey that looks like yours. And why is this important? Because although some of these people will be at universities, you'll start to notice that a bunch of them actually either are entrepreneurs, they're CEOs of, or they're of a startup, or they have different key positions in different companies, or they also can be in different government organizations, where you can find them and then see, okay, this person has this job description or this position. Oh, this is interesting to me, or this is not interesting to me. What type of terms does this person use on their profile? Do I use them on mine, or are they useful for me to use on my profile? So this whole conversation, to me, was the idea. It was to bring inspiration to people who are feeling lost, or kind of very unsure about what comes. And what best way than to go see what people like you are doing and did and where they are. So that's kind of top tip number 2, is find the people who look like you on a platform like LinkedIn and see how they present themselves. And of course, like I just mentioned, see what type of terms, what type of words they use. Start taking note. And of course, in parallel, it's what type of jobs they have and would they be interesting to me. Now, top tip number 3.
Oh, bonusing. I love it. I love it.
It's increasing in difficulty. And I'm saying this because although it might not sound so, I'm an introvert by nature. And this is, you're going to see that I'm going to increase the difficulty. So first, get on the platform. Second, look for the people. 3, choose 1 or 2 people, 2 persons that are in positions that inspire you, and ask them for 20 minutes of their time to ask them some questions about where they are, about the space they are in terms of industry or whatever. Just be very respectful of the time, of course. There's an etiquette to follow. If people don't answer often, it's because they're quite busy. But if someone says, "Oh, okay, sure, I'd be happy to," I'm an alumni, you're now doing what I did 15 years ago, I'd be glad to spend 20 minutes with you. Well, come prepared, do your homework, actually do this work that I said before of learning about their profile, at least what's presented, and then try to prepare some questions to kind of project yourself into that same industry, in that same space. And there's 2 outcomes possible. First outcome, wow, this is interesting. Thank you so much for your time. Let's keep in touch. Eventually I'd love to collaborate with you sometime. This can take many forms. Or, okay, thank you. And then in your head, actually, it's not what you thought it was. And you can scratch it out of your list, which is a very, very important. Scratching things out of your list is very, very important.
Yes.
But there's another connection to the beginning of our conversations, which is actually the word conversations. So the thing for me that caps this whole thing is, if you can have, I don't know, 1 conversation a month with someone like this, when you'll finish your degree, you'll have accrued so much in terms of just connections of people you can reach out to when you eventually are looking for a position. But also this terminology, this culture, you will have started to learn about it and to know it, so that eventually when you have those first job conversations, people will think, oh, he's one of us, she's one of us. They know the lingo. They've been doing their homework. So yeah, conversations, have them at a pace that works for you. If you're very introverted, stretch out the intervals a little bit more. But I think for me, this would be if I have to sum it up in 1 top tip, is have rich and meaningful conversations and develop rich and meaningful relationships with people who have a journey that looks like yours and who might be in spaces you want to be one day.
This is so gorgeous. I love it. And again, an example of bringing your research skills to your kind of your professional journey. And this is the thing. One thing PhD researchers are really good at is doing their homework.
Exactly.
All over it. David, thank you so much. Thank you more generally for the work that you do, but thank you especially for being here today. It's been gorgeous to talk with you, and I know that this is going to be useful to so many people. Thank you so much.
Well, my pleasure, mate. It's been a pleasure. It's been great seeing you for the first time, because we've been exchanging messages for a while.
Yes.
And it's been a pleasure being here at the PhD Live Draft microphone.
Thank you. And thank you all for listening.